Burkina Faso has stopped taking aid and no one saw it coming. Why would a nation walk away from free money, global support, and Western praise? What's the secret behind this sudden shift? Let's find out. While the world debated economic forecasts, global summits, and donor pledges, Burkina Faso quietly crossed a line that most developing countries fear to approach. With no press conference, no Western media applause, and no diplomatic fanfare, the government shut the door on foreign aid. Not a pause, not a suspension. A conscious, strategic halt. No new loans, no fresh grants, no humanitarian assistance packaged with political lectures. Instead, Burkina Faso has chosen to run its state, finance its projects, and manage its national future by relying solely on what it already owns. The timing is not accidental. Across the global south, trust in international systems is fading. Promises made through aid have delivered very little structural change. Roads were built, but rarely led to rural empowerment. Schools were opened, but often taught a worldview not rooted in local history. Food was shipped in, but eventually crushed local farming markets. What was marketed as generosity often came wrapped in fine print, conditions, compromises, and quiet control. Burkina Faso took note, and then it chose the unthinkable, not to ask again. Yet what makes this decision more stunning is not the rejection itself, it's the quiet confidence behind it. This isn't a country scrambling to survive alone. It's a country revealing that, all along, it had enough to stand. Gold reserves long extracted by foreign firms are now being refined inside the country in its high-capacity refinery. Domestic rice production has been expanded, not just to feed the population, but to become an export strength. And agricultural projects once sidelined by imported goods have been restructured into self-sustaining industries. The shift isn't just financial, it's psychological. The question is no longer, what can others do for us? But what have we always had that we refuse to use? International observers, still clinging to old playbooks, haven't fully processed what's happening. They expect backlash, economic pain, or even collapse, but they're missing the point. Burkina Faso isn't isolating itself. It is insulating its sovereignty. The refusal to take aid is not born from arrogance. It is born from exhaustion, the exhaustion of pretending that dependency is a strategy. Behind this silence lies an old truth. Aid often arrives late, stays long, and leaves deeper wounds. What Burkina Faso has declared is that it no longer wishes to be saved. It simply wants to survive on its terms. For decades, development in Africa has been treated as something to be gifted, not something to be grown. Burkina Faso just redefined that logic with one decisive act, closing the gates to donations and opening the doors to internal power. Of course, the West will not celebrate this moment. Aid agencies and diplomats have always preferred to view countries like Burkina Faso as students, not equals. This decision removes the teacher from the room. It leaves the chalkboard blank. And it says, we will write our curriculum now. This isn't a protest against globalization. It's a realignment of purpose. The message is quiet, but its implications are thunderous. If one of Africa's poorest countries can declare financial independence without collapse, what excuse remains for the rest of the continent? Now the world is watching, some with concern, others with hope. But one thing is certain, something irreversible has begun. A country has stopped asking for help, and instead of falling apart, it is rising, slowly, firmly, and on its ground. But how did the aid model fail so thoroughly in the first place? Why did a system meant to help end up weakening entire nations? That's where the real story begins. Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. When Burkina Faso stopped taking aid, many assumed the country was cutting itself off from the world. Headlines, where they appeared, whispered warnings: isolation, insurgency, economic danger. The assumption was clear: to refuse aid is to choose collapse. But what if that logic is completely backward? What if accepting aid was never a lifeline, but a slow entanglement? And what if walking away from it wasn't madness, but the beginning of freedom? to understand the significance of this moment, one has to understand the machinery aid built, not just in Burkina Faso, but across the global south. Aid, as the world understands it, isn't just about giving money. It is about shaping decisions. In theory, development aid is supposed to fix roads, schools, hospitals, and economies. In practice, it often fixes minds, locking countries into predefined roles and donor-approved ambitions. In the name of progress, aid imposes blueprints designed in foreign capitals, sold with buzzwords, and enforced through financial dependency. For decades, the world told countries like Burkina Faso that without foreign intervention, there could be no growth. Development was made to sound like a gift, but the gift came wrapped in rules. Accept a loan, and you restructure your budget. Take a grant, and you alter your agricultural policy. Receive training programs, and suddenly your judicial system, your education system, even your military doctrine reflects someone else's ideology. The result is subtle but corrosive: the erosion of a nation's ability to think for itself. This is what Burkina Faso is liberating itself from. The break from aid is not a retreat, it's a rejection of invisible colonization. By stepping away from donor-driven development, the country is reclaiming something far more precious than cash: its right to make mistakes, learn, adapt, and decide independently. It's choosing discomfort with dignity over comfort with strings. Those who defend the old model point to statistics: child mortality rates lowered, school enrollment improved, and clinics built. But they rarely discuss the sustainability of those gains. What happens when the funding dries up? What happens when a change in leadership in Washington or Brussels closes the tap? What happens to a country that outsourced its core functions to donors and is suddenly left alone in the dark? That's the real risk, not rejecting aid, but building a nation on rented scaffolding. Burkina Faso has watched this happen around the world. It has seen leaders rise on the promise of foreign grants, only to fall when that support was withdrawn. It has seen hospitals built by NGOs collapse the moment funding cycles ended. It has seen policies shaped to please embassies rather than citizens. And it has chosen not to repeat the cycle. Critics may argue that isolation comes at a price. But Burkina Faso isn't isolating. It's aligning with its people, its land, and its long-term interests. It's forging new partnerships, not based on dependency, but on mutual respect. It's showing that cooperation does not require surrender. In truth, the aid model didn't fail because it lacked resources. It failed because it lacked trust. It treated sovereign nations as helpless children, not as equal partners. And over time, the most devastating effect wasn't economic, it was psychological. Countries forgot how to dream without permission. Burkina Faso is now rebuilding that muscle. It's learning to walk without crutches, even if it stumbles. It's embracing the risks of real independence. And that's why this moment matters, because for the first time in a generation, a country has chosen to chart its course without asking anyone for a map. All thanks to Traore. By the way, we have launched merch that honors the African leaders who are taking a stand for Africa. Check them out. To show you also stand with loyal sons of Africa, no matter where you are. But what is Burkina Faso building exactly? What industries, what projects, what sources of strength are allowing this experiment to even be possible? Burkina Faso is not conjuring wealth out of thin air. It is finally turning toward the resources it always had, but never truly owned. The riches were never missing. They were mismanaged. The problem was never poverty. It was pillage dressed as partnership. For decades, this country's gold left the ground and vanished into the vaults of companies headquartered continents. Its farms were undervalued. Its land, its workers, its markets, all left underfed while feeding others. That is what's changing now. At the center of this new economic strategy is the principle of retention, keeping value in country, not just extracting raw materials for someone else to process and profit from. The jewel of this transformation is the creation of Burkina Faso's first national gold refinery, a facility capable of refining 400 kilograms of gold every day. For a country ranked among Africa's top gold producers, this is not just a technical upgrade, it's a revolution in power. For decades, the gold industry operated under a simple but devastating rule: Burkina Faso digs, others decide. The ore would be extracted by foreign-owned firms, processed abroad, and re-imported as finished products, while the host country got pennies on the dollar. Now, that cycle is being interrupted. With in-country refining, Burkina Faso is cutting off the oxygen supply to the exploitative loop that kept its wealth flowing out and poverty flowing in. But this isn't just about gold. It's about agriculture, too, the true heartbeat of the country. For years, despite having fertile land and a willing workforce, Burkina Faso imported rice and processed foods at a massive cost. Tomatoes grown in local fields would rot before they could be used, while tomato paste shipped from Europe lined the shelves of local stores. That absurd contradiction is now being dismantled. Through national investment, not external loans, Burkina Faso has built a modern tomato processing plant worth over $8 million. That figure is symbolic, not just because it shows financial commitment, but because it proves that even modest funds, when directed wisely, can create structural change. Farmers who once sold crops for survival are now supplying an industry. A supply chain has replaced a survival chain. The same logic applies to domestic rice production. Burkina Faso is no longer just growing for itself, it's becoming a supplier to neighboring countries. Through initiatives like Les Moulins du Sahel, it has transformed from a food-dependent state to a regional food contributor. It's not about charity anymore. It's about trade. Every move the country makes now seems rooted in one principle: keep the wealth here and let the people benefit first. These aren't mega projects meant to attract global praise. They're focused, strategic investments aimed at resilience. The wealth isn't just being measured in tons of gold or bags of rice. It's showing up in jobs, in dignity, in less reliance on imports. And this is the paradox that the global system never expected: that a nation once classified among the world's poorest could become a model, not because it received the most aid, but because it stopped receiving any at all. What Burkina Faso is showing is that it doesn't take billions in donor funds to rise. It takes control over what is already yours. But how did so many African nations lose control of their wealth in the first place? How did a continent rich in resources become poor in power? To answer that, we have to revisit the deeper problem, not what was taken, but how it was taken. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Long before the gold refineries and tomato factories, before independence was even declared on paper, Burkina Faso's fate, as with much of Africa, was already being written elsewhere. It wasn't just the gold that was taken. It was the systems, the voices, the very right to define what progress meant. And in place of that, a foreign blueprint was forced in. A model that whispered to the African mind, "You are broken, and we will fix you." But this fix came at a cost. As colonial flags came down, aid flags went up. The extractors didn't leave, they simply changed uniforms. The mining contracts, trade agreements, structural adjustment programs, and donor-led reforms weren't designed to build independence. They were designed to manage it, to ensure that the newly free nations never strayed too far from their assigned role. Exporters of raw goods, importers of refined dependency. And the genius of this system was its disguise. It didn't arrive with weapons, it arrived with spreadsheets. It spoke in terms like capacity building, good governance, and investment climate. It presented itself not as conquest, but as concern. Yet the results were eerily familiar. African nations were once again building railroads, but they didn't own the routes. They were growing food, but not feeding themselves. They were exporting minerals, but importing misery. This was not mismanagement, it was design. By the 1980s, much of Africa was plunged into the IMF and World Bank's economic reform programs, labeled as structural adjustment. Under these programs, countries were told to liberalize markets, cut public spending, privatize national assets, and open their doors to foreign investors. In return, they received loans and aid packages that were supposed to stabilize their economies. Instead, many of them crumbled. In Burkina Faso, the consequences were visible for decades. Public services weakened. State-owned industries collapsed under the weight of forced privatization. Multinationals moved in and dictated terms. Entire generations grew up believing that their country could not function unless an outsider showed them how. The loss wasn't just physical, it was cognitive. People stopped trusting their governments. Experts from abroad were flown in to explain how their land, their people, and their problems should be managed. Burkina Faso's break from aid, then, is not just a financial decision. It's an act of memory. It is a refusal to forget what aid replaced. By building with its wealth, the nation is not just creating infrastructure, it is rebuilding identity. It is reminding itself that before anyone came offering help, the land already provided, the people already worked, and the future already existed. This is why the change is so unsettling to those who once held influence, because it doesn't just threaten economic leverage, it threatens the narrative. It rewrites the story in which Africa is perpetually dependent, always needing external validation and resources. Burkina Faso is now living proof that the story was never true. It was just told well enough to be believed. And perhaps the most radical part of this shift is the silence. There are no fiery speeches, no grand declarations to the United Nations. The message is delivered quietly, in the form of policies, production, and pride. Aid is no longer being asked for. The doors to dependency are closing one by one, not with hostility, but with clarity. But if Burkina Faso is reclaiming its memory, the next question is whether it can protect that memory in the long run. Can this model survive pressure from the global system? Can it be scaled, defended, and replicated? What happens when a nation reclaims its direction, but the old world tries to pull it back? Burkina Faso has made its decision. It has stepped away from the table where deals were signed in whispers, and sovereignty was traded for short-term stability. But the question that looms now is not just whether this act of rebellion was justified, it is whether it can endure. Because walking away from aid is one thing, staying upright when the world tries to pull you back is another. History offers no shortage of warnings. Countries that defied global financial systems have often been punished quietly, with sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and economic sabotage dressed as concern. And although Burkina Faso may no longer be kneeling before donor tables, the chairs around it haven't emptied. Western institutions still monitor, still pressure, still warn of consequences. Aid may no longer flow in, but influence has 1,000 forms. It hides in trade agreements, in media framing, in the calculated silence of allies who once claimed friendship. Already whispers have begun that Burkina Faso is falling behind, that its leadership is too radical, too risky. Those reforms are unsupervised. These aren't just opinions, they are early moves in a larger game, a subtle campaign to discredit independence before it spreads. Because if one nation can walk away from the system and survive, then the system itself begins to look optional. That's a dangerous idea for those who built their empires on the illusion of necessity. But survival will not hinge on international acceptance. It will depend on something far deeper: internal coherence. Burkina Faso's ability to remain on this path depends on whether its institutions, its people, and its leadership can remain aligned when the first cracks appear. Will they hold the line when markets fluctuate? When do shortages test patience? When opposition, domestic or foreign, starts calling for a return to normal? The answer lies in the kind of independence being built. Not one made of slogans, but of systems. The test will come not just from abroad, but from within. Can national industries become self-sustaining? Can public services rise to meet the needs once filled by foreign NGOs? Can political leadership remain unshaken under global scrutiny? It is here that the real work begins, not in rejecting the old world, but in proving the new one can function. And yet, there is something quietly working in Burkina Faso's favor: momentum. Across Africa, the mood is changing. The younger generation does not carry the same emotional attachment to foreign benevolence. They are more skeptical, more restless, more ready to believe in homegrown strength. In the markets of Bamako, the classrooms of Niamey, and the streets of Conakry, there is a rising confidence, a sense that the continent is no longer waiting for rescue but preparing for self-definition. Burkina Faso, in this sense, is not just an isolated case. It is becoming a mirror. The more it stands, the more it reflects what others could do. Its tomato factories, its gold refineries, its rejection of aid, all these are not just policies. They are signals. They say, it can be done. You don't have to wait. You don't have to ask. You don't have to beg. You can begin. Whether this model becomes the new African standard will depend not only on its results but also on its defenders. The old world will not give up easily. It will attempt to return with softer faces, smarter contracts, and louder warnings. But Burkina Faso has chosen to listen inward, not outward, and that may be its greatest advantage. So now, the world watches, not just to see if Burkina Faso can stand, but to see if it can lead, not with armies or headlines, but with an idea. The road to freedom was never paved with aid. It was always buried under the soil, waiting to be walked on with bare feet and full memory. This is not just a break from the past. It is the quiet beginning of a new future, one where Africa is no longer told what it needs. It decides. Do you think Traore will be able to handle all challenges? Can anything stop him? Let us know in the comments section. Can this path be followed by all nations? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.